Hello, everybody, and welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker, who's going to be joining us in about a half an hour. And today we have a very interesting topic which deals with education and, frankly, global education with the war that's taking place in Ukraine. In other words, how it's affecting our education system. So with that, we need somebody who's knowledgeable in global education, which isn't me. So Dr. Maya is going to be joining us in just a minute, and she's actually the head of the Forbes School of Business, University of Arizona Global Campus. She's the interim dean there, and she can probably give us a better perspective than I can ever on global education, what this crisis in Ukraine is doing. So we're going to bring in Dr. Maya right now. Dr. Maya, welcome to the show. Good to have you here. So the first question is, tell our viewers, I know you've been on before, but it's been quite some time ago. Tell the viewers a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, what you do, the basics.
Sure. I'm the interim dean with the Forbes School of Business and Technology at the University of Arizona Global Campus here in Arizona. And I was working on many different ventures across the world on e-learning development and implementation. I'm also a Fulbright researcher and a Fulbright specialist. And I've done research ventures across the world, and also have done lectures across the world. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, a few of my details.
Wow. Okay. And so the thing is, where'd you get your education from? Where'd you get your PhD?
Sure. I went through, well, first of all, bachelor's degree, University of North Florida. Then I've earned 2 master's degrees, and my PhD was with the Capella University. So I've done 2 different paths. One was the traditional path of education, and the other one was non-traditional. I've started my bachelor's journey actually in Austria at the University of Leopold Francesca in Innsbruck, and I continued my education here in the United States once I immigrated to the U.S.
Oh, wow. Okay. And tell us a little about the global campus that you're working on right now. Tell the viewers, because we have viewers all over the world, and a little bit about the University of Arizona, the global campus, so that they know more a little bit about it.
Absolutely. University of Arizona Global Campus is affiliate of the University of Arizona. We are geared towards adult learners. Our average student is a working individual. Usually our students have children, and some of them have not only 1, 2 to 3 jobs. So they actually attend their classes online, usually in the evening hours and on the weekends. We are providing affordable, flexible education for the working adults that otherwise would not have been able to probably pursue some more of the traditional patterns of education. We are one of the technology leaders. We are also, our college is affiliated with the Forbes Media, hence the name, the title, Forbes School of Business and Technology. And we're doing a lot of different innovative movements and projects in the world of education. We also have a very robust Center for Women's Leadership. Forbes School of Business actually launched in June of 2020 Center for Women's Leadership that is handling student mentorship, alumni mentorship, different research ventures, providing some insight into the field of female leadership. Also, we are hosting workshops, community chats, and different events. So that is just a quick snapshot into all the activities that we're doing. But I do invite your leaders to take a look at some of the online resources and look into some of our programs and some of our offerings for sure.
Okay. And yeah, I was going to ask, what sort of majors does someone have if they wanted to attend the University of Arizona, the global campus? What sort of majors do you have?
We actually have a business school. We also have a College of Arts and Sciences. So you have a vast variety of majors, undergraduate, graduate, and we also have a PhD programs.
Really?
So there is a good mixture. For example, one of the divisions that I'm managing is hosting our signature MBA program, Signature the Forbes Way. It's quite innovative, recently revamped, and has a lot of original videos, articles, books, simulation games, and a lot of different skills that are applicable in the world of business, because we do know that the world of business is, once you start your education year one, by the time you graduate, a lot of times some of the skills are becoming obsolete. The online platform and the innovative technologies that we have is enabling us to provide frequent update to the course content and real-time discussions. For example, in our MBA program, we have the actual live feeds and blogs from the industry experts. So instead of our students discussing something that might have been in a textbook that is 2 years old, they're actually discussing something that just happened in the world of business that morning.
Hmm. Right. So the thing is, it's really up to date. Now,
Yes.
I'm very curious about this global campus because when I went to school, which is now many moons ago, we didn't even have computer monitors. That's how
Yeah.
many moons ago it really was.
Yeah.
That when I left school, I was saying, "What's that?" They go, "Oh, that's a computer monitor." I said, "We don't have to use punch cards anymore." Okay,
Yeah.
so that was the way it was back then. But now you have this global campus. Tell me about, like, because a lot of people that are viewing our show are from Lithuania, Ukraine, believe it or not, Ukraine, even though I'm not sure how they're seeing us right now. They used to watch
Yeah.
our shows all the time. But Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Poland. And so they're from all over the world. Are these people now able to apply for the global campus and be part of the University of Arizona family? Is that what's going on?
We are well, the global campus is mainly referencing the fact that you can access your education from anywhere where you at, with a laptop, with a computer, even with a cell phone. We are expanding, and we're working on expansion of our international operations. At this point of time, we do accept international students, but not necessarily in masses at this point of time. But it is one of the agenda items to expand internationally. So yes, we do have international students and international students that are go through the regular international process. Those of you listening to us from overseas, the process is usually you get your transcripts evaluated. There are several foreign evaluation agencies here in the United States that are very credible and very good, actually very fast as well. And that's actually similarly something that I went through when I went from Austria, where I was actually doing my undergraduates, and coming here to the United States to Florida. I went through the similar process of foreign credit evaluation. Depending upon where you are with the credits that you already earned in your country, you are able to enroll not only with us but with other universities and continue your education. So the process is there. We would like to see it way more expanded with all the changes that are happening in the world in general, and also we are looking into different international operations at this point of time.
Mhm. Okay, so the thing is, Ankit says congratulations. He's in India now. Now, my question is, let's go to India right now. Can people from India apply to be part of the University of Arizona Global Campus?
Yes, but like I said, we do have a certain body of the international students. We're still not fully exploring the market.
Hmm.
It is one of our agenda items, but everyone internationally, like I said, going through the foreign credit evaluation process and meeting the English proficiency is able to apply. With that said, what I would like to see happen in the future, in the near future, as a matter of fact, is for us to do this even in a more organized fashion through the university partnerships across the world. So absolutely.
Okay, another comment came from Mark Lee. Recently, did a lecture from Mojave Community College. Great giving lunchtime lecture right here in Durham. So the thing is, as you can see, what happens? It looks to me that it looks to me like the world is shrinking when it comes to being able to have students from all over participate in a college campus, which gets me to now the tough questions before. Yeah, we still have some time before David Walker comes in. Okay, which the tough questions deal with the problems that we're having in Ukraine. In other words, are you seeing problems in global education due to the Ukraine-Russian crisis?
Well, we've seen problems in the world of education as a result of other crises as well. Ukraine crisis is on everyone's mind and everyone's heart at this point of time with everything that's happening right now. But we've seen issues with the education in all the areas of conflict and all the areas of crisis in the past. For example, I know that a Jordanese government was trying to regulate and trying to pursue some online modality for the refugees that were coming from Iraq and Syria, and they were living actually in the refugee camps in Jordan. So even though the Jordanese government have not opened itself up to the online education fully as of yet. They were trying to look into some solutions for the refugee community in Jordan as a scenario. So that is just one of the examples. I do remember, and Nick, you know my story. I come from the former Yugoslavia region. I come from Bosnia, and I do remember when my own educational journey was completely interrupted during the Bosnian War. Luckily for what's happening right now in areas such as Ukraine, luckily for the students, the online education is now widespread. And that was, of course, not the case in the 90s when my educational journey was interrupted. So I do feel that a Polish government, Romanian government, many Hungarian governments, many other governments that are currently accepting the refugees, that they will enable some sort of if it's an online education or some sort of modality for the Ukraine refugees to re-enter the educational system, maybe more in a traditional manner in the peaceful countries at this point of time, but that does not solve what's happening with the Ukraine children right now, Ukraine students. I would imagine, and I'm speculating here, and we should never speculate, that at this point of time, their first priority is safety. Their first priority is things such as food, electricity, and shelter. So the education right this second, being that this conflict is so fresh, may not be on the forefront of their thinking. We all hope this conflict ends ASAP. If it does not, that will also be one of the things that Ukraine government is going to have to look into, how to provide continuity of education for the children that are still staying in Ukraine and the young people that are in the university system. We heard some stories about the foreign students trying to exit, but also what's happening with the Ukraine students that are still in those more impacted areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the thing is, are we going to see, because there's some universities that have a huge amount of students that are from overseas, are we going to see in the United States a diminishing of these students, or is there going to be an increase of students from overseas? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it really depends. The Ukraine, if we're talking about just to make sure I understand your question, if we're talking about the Ukraine students,
Mm-hmm.
they may seek education elsewhere for the time being. I would imagine, of course, cannot, like I said, the Ukraine government right now has so many priorities. Protecting its people, protecting its land, protecting its borders. I would imagine that education is there on one of the list items, but I don't. We'd be misleading ourselves if we say that that is their number one priority. So many students will first seek independently ways around what's happening moving forward. I would like to reflect on the example of the Bosnian universities during the war in Bosnia. The vast majority of Bosnian universities were amazingly so still in existence during the war. And that was prior to the online modality. So you had students walk to the universities, children walking to school, going to school, and sadly often getting killed as they were still trying to pursue the education in the horrific circumstances. So if history teaches us anything, is that children, young people of Ukraine and all the conflict areas still want to continue that continuity of education and maintain that sense of normalcy. And sometimes it's even at the expense of risking their own lives. Luckily, again, we are now living in the era of the online education. So hopefully there will be lots of opportunities for them that perhaps were not available in some other areas of the world, where perhaps they can still access education through from safer locations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Ann Kidd also from India said that there were 16,000, I don't know that many, students studying medicine in Ukraine. And then they had a program to screen them and basically get them out of the university. So we do see there's an exodus of people in Ukraine because I don't know how you go to school with bombs around you. It
Um,
doesn't seem to make much sense. But go on.
Indian high official of India, and Ankit can correct me. I'm not 100% certain if it was a prime minister, but one of the highest ranking officials just talked to President Zelensky pertaining to creating a safe passage for the Indian students out of Ukraine. It is my understanding that the quickest passage for them would have been through the Russian territory.
Mhm.
And that's what's causing additional layers of complexity. So I know that many governments are negotiating right now. For example, I've heard of a huge percentage of Nigerian students, students from Nigeria, Kenya, and a few other African countries that are also in Ukraine and that are trying to exit. So you have several layers of complexity. You have the foreign students that are trying to exit and go back to their countries and eventually continuing their education. You're going to have a segment of the Ukraine students that will be refugees across Europe. They will either join the educational communities within those countries, or perhaps some of the Ukraine universities will continue operating online. I would imagine that right now, university professors, educators, deans, presidents of the Ukraine universities are working on some sort of contingency plans, because I've seen that happen in all the conflict areas.
Mhm. Yeah, and you did part of your schooling overseas in Vienna, is that correct, as well as in the United States?
Well, first I started schooling in Sarajevo
All right.
in former Yugoslavia. Almost finished high school there. I was actually, as we were getting ready for the prom, that's when the war broke out.
Right.
I was then going to
Great.
Austria at the
Yeah.
University of Innsbruck.
Mhm.
I've done my undergraduate studies there, almost finished, then immigrated to the United States and resumed. So I was actually technically going through school in three different countries, vastly different settings.
Mhm.
Like I said, a lot of my journey was a very traditional journey. And then once the online education became available, I was able to do more of a non-traditional approach.
Right. Now, there's a perception here in the United States that the United States is the best education system in the world, but you've actually had experience overseas and also over here. Is that just propaganda that I'm getting from people in the United States? Because I'm seriously considering talking my grandchildren to go overseas for an education. In other words, go to schools overseas because you get that, what I call international experience, that you won't get if you just go to college here in the US. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
There, there are many wonderful things about educational systems across the world. They're truly vastly different. I went to a high school in Bosnia, Sarajevo. It's called the First Gymnasium, that actually had several Nobel Prize winners. So going to a high school that actually gave birth to Nobel Prize winners is definitely a special thing. We were focusing on general education quite a bit. You didn't have the concept of electives as much. You would have a 15, 16 subjects that you have to take throughout your 4 years. And then, of course, you can do an elective, but you're doing that after those 14, 15 mandatory subjects. So we had to study Latin. We had to study Greek philosophy. We had to read Russian classics. So what I'm trying to say is the focus was vastly different. I do feel that United States education is incredible, but I do feel that focus is a lot on the field that you're trying to pursue. I do feel that maybe a European education is first giving you a more rounded approach, focusing on different general educational concepts, and then they equip you for the field that you're in. So I don't know that there is such a thing as a good thing or a bad thing, nor do I like to talk about any country in terms of superiority when it comes to educational ventures. The passion of educators, the passion of teachers, professors, the passion of students to learn. I went from Middle East, I went to Southern African region. A lot of times I've done some research on the textbook shortage in countries in Africa, and you had educators that are actually adding value to those old textbook by printing every single day some additional material for their students and working quadruple as hard as maybe some of the educators in the Western world, but they're still producing and giving value to those students. I've done a very interesting seminar in Zambia, and one thing that totally impressed me with how prepared the participants were, how hungry they were for the research conferences or seminars. I've never had, and I've lectured across the world, I never had audience member getting up, asking questions and citing sources prior to asking questions. I had that happen to me in Zambia.
Oh, wow.
The eagerness to interact with the presenter was actually not matched by any other place that I went into. So what I'm trying to say is, one thing, let's talk about versus differences. What we share the passion for education. We share the natural desire of human beings to get educated and to better their lives. And there are lots of goodness here. There's a lot of goodness in other places. And one thing that you said is, absolutely, let's travel. Absolutely, if there is an opportunity for students to do a one year of exchange studies elsewhere, and vice versa, coming to the United States, going to other places, I think that is just going to enrich someone's existence. So definitely, I would advocate that.
That's what I would agree to. And now we're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States, who's also into education as well. So let's welcome David Walker to the show. David, what's your show? So you should be welcome, I guess. But we're here with Dr. Maya, who's actually the interim dean at the Forbes International School of Business at the University of Arizona. And David, but you actually have a background also in education as well. Weren't you teaching for the U.S. Naval Academy?
I was, and I have an honorary doctorate from the University of Arizona in Tucson as well.
Oh, okay. I did not know that.
Oh,
okay.
That's right. I mean, by far the best value for money, these honorary doctorates. I'm fortunate to have several. But since it's an honorary one, you can't call me Dr. Walker. You have to call me Dr. Dave. Okay.
Okay.
But yes, I taught the economics of national security at the Naval Academy. Had the Crow Chair for a couple of years, and and education is obviously critically important. I mean, if you look at the gaps in society in the United States, for example, the income gap, the wealth gap. The biggest correlation between the income gap and the wealth gap is education. And we can talk a lot about education. I'll mention a few things, and then we can see where it goes. You've got K through 12, and you've got higher level education, university education, et cetera. And K through 12, unfortunately, the United States is below average for an industrialized nation on performance at K through 12 with regard to math and with regard to literacy. And there's a tremendous variance, but depending upon where you're getting your K through 12 education. We've got among the highest and the best university system in the world, and you have people coming from all over the world to come here because of that fact. My understanding was that one of the things we wanted to try to work into this conversation was Ukraine and the impact of Ukraine. And I would say that two of the things that we don't teach enough of is history and geography. And I would respectfully suggest that most Americans couldn't point to Ukraine on a map. Maybe more of them can today because of what's going on in that country right now. And not enough Americans have an understanding of world history. We do teach U.S. history to differing degrees, but not enough of world history, if you will, and the history behind conflicts in the past, and in particular case of Ukraine, how it's become part of different nations or empires over the different years, if you will. And you and I have always talked about the fact that the U.S. education system doesn't do a good enough job with regard to financial literacy and civic responsibility, and that goes without saying. So let me just start with that, and let's take it from there about where you want to take this, because I was a little bit unclear about where we were going today. I saw education, and I saw Ukraine, and I'm going, okay.
Yeah. Well, let me
connect the dots here.
The thing is, I'm wondering, because some of the universities that we work with, even Northeastern, we get a lot of our students are from foreign countries that come here. Will the conflict in Ukraine reduce or increase the amount of foreign students? Because it's one of our big exports. You have to imagine part of our big GDP is actually teaching education. In other words, education as part of our economy. Now, with this conflict in Ukraine, are people less likely to come over here for their education? And on the visas that they can get, are people less likely, or are they more likely to come here. So that was my question, David, is which way is education going to go? And Dr. Mam may have known. I did know this. I can tell you this. At Northeastern, where I've been an adjunct professor for 11 years now at the graduate tax program, they basically shut down our program because of COVID-19. In other words, and I was going, why? Well, here's the reason I got back from the administration. It's a private school, very expensive to go to Northeastern, not like University of Arizona. But the thing is, the CPA firms that were paying for it were so scared of the economic backlash, they started pulling scholarships. Like no kidding. In other words, so there was a backlash on that. So my thinking is, are we going to see this because of Ukraine? Less people enroll in education in the United States, or more? I just don't know what you've seen. And Dr. Mayo, you may know because you're on the front lines of this one. What are you seeing in enrollments?
Well, I think that it's, and I'm not sure that that I'm the best equipped to answer this question per se, but every time when there is a crisis in the world, there's an influx of refugees in all the countries, and United States will be no exception. And a lot of times, somehow, even though those two things should not be necessarily correlated, there are some restrictions pertaining to the admission of the foreign students. So I do see that scenario as one of the scenarios, but I am comforted by the fact that I mentioned to you, Nick, that we do have lots of opportunities for the students in the conflict areas that we have not had in the past because of the widespread online education. So one necessarily does not have to physically reside in a particular country to pursue education in that country. Now, of course, it is wonderful if those two things can align, but absence of aligning those two things, the students will still have an option. So that's one of the things that that actually makes me feel positive pertaining to the future of education, even with us constantly having additional conflict areas, as it seems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, David, do you see a lot of more enrollment in U.S. higher education, or are people shying away from it? Reason I'm saying is that I get conflicting views on this right now.
Well, as I mentioned before, I think the U.S. higher education system, meaning university system, is generally viewed as among the best, if not the best in the world. And so I think there's a lot of desire of people outside the United States to come to the United States for that education. You talked about COVID-19. Well, we're getting through COVID-19. That's an aberration. That's
Right.
not something that that we're going to have to continue to deal with. So I think that the desire of people to come to the United States for higher education is going to continue. You talk about visas. That has to do with government policy, right? I mean, government policy can at times be very frustrating, if you will. I mean, we're in a global economic Olympics. If anything, we want more people to come here for education. And in some cases, we want to make it easier for those people to stay here, especially in fields where we have a supply and demand imbalance, where we need more people with that type of a background. Excellent point with regard to the fact that we now have more online education, and therefore you can gain an education from a U.S. university without physically being in the United States, and vice versa. For example, I have a nephew who for a period of time was in Poland, no longer, but was for a period of time in Poland, and he was getting an online master's degree in engineering from Georgia Tech while he was in Poland. The other thing I'm aware of is there are a number of top universities, including some of the Ivy League universities, that have formed alliances with other major universities around the world, and they have joint programs that they offer, in some cases in person, and in many cases online. And so I think, the United States higher education system is always going to be in demand. And the real question is, how do you deliver that? Where do you deliver that? And what are we delivering?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and for my personal experience, David, I didn't know I was American until I went overseas to Oxford University, And so I had part of my legal training was at St. Edmund's Hall at Oxford, because you find out Oxford University isn't really a university. It's all these colleges. You have Trinity, St. Edmund's, all these other things. Then I went to Paris, and boy, got another shock of my life. They don't speak English over there, and I didn't speak French. And so I got my homeless experience when the bus left us, literally. And I was on the streets of Paris with my other classmate, Ken Carasello, and we had no credit cards because this is back in the 80s. What students have credit cards? No money. Remember, we're a student. Okay. No communication. And you're stuck in Paris. So where do you spend the night? Spend the night on the streets in Paris. What else are you going to do? I mean, that's kind of an interesting
Well,
experience. But I think it's a great experience, though.
right.
Yeah, I do.
As was mentioned previously,
Yeah.
I think one of the real opportunities for those who have the means to do it, to enhance their education and their knowledge, is travel.
Right.
I've been fortunate. I've traveled to 100 countries on Earth, roughly 100, maybe a little more, every continent on Earth. And you don't realize how good or bad you have it until you have something to compare it to.
Right.
And not enough Americans have had that opportunity, and we're not perfect. We never will be. We're always striving to form a more perfect union. But when we look at us on a comparative basis, we're a pretty good place to be. And the other thing is about Paris. I'll tell you a quick joke on that. When we took our daughter and son over to Paris one time when they were younger, and my son turns on the TV and he goes, "Dad, they're speaking French on this TV." I said, "Son, you're in Paris, France."
Right. That's what they speak. And you can't understand anything they're saying. They just, after a while, you learn a couple words and you kind of get around. Now, another thing that really disturbs me about education is what I call this, it's really the scale of misinformation that's going out there on the internet. It's pretty big. And if you ever have a chance to visit this group, I told them I'd promote it. It's called Understanding China on the Facebook group. They really do study American history, like more so than the people in the United States. And I've told them this. You guys know more about American history than American students do. But what they do, Dr. Maya and David, is they twist it or spin it, where at the end of the day, the United States is evil and Russia and China are great. Okay. How do you say, and I don't think even Americans even realize this is what's going on, because these, obviously, if you ever go to that Facebook group, they appear to be either A, people from Russia that are paid by the government to denounce the United States, or B, they're really Chinese that are really being told that America is bad and horrible. How do we combat this? What I would say is the scale of misinformation. And if you don't believe me that this is going on right now in China, go to this website, Understanding China Facebook groups. Say hello, I'm from the USA, and you'll find out, yeah, you were from the USA, but man, you have very few friends over there. So I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Yeah.
Well, the global misinformation is happening. Every single country is encountering this problem, opportunity, whatever you want to call it. We have a completely new generation that is right now steering away from reading books, steering away from reading researched academic articles, and they're relying on internet to get all of their news. And the issue is, and there are so many wonderful, terrific documentaries. One recently that I watched on Netflix. I usually forget titles of things, so it doesn't matter. But they were teaching us how the algorithms work. So the three of us here were having this conversation, great conversation. What we fail to realize is the vast majority of our social media may be vastly different. So the three of us are getting completely different news, even here within the United States, because the algorithms are basically recognizing our areas of interest and sadly our areas of preference. And it is a human nature to look for the validation of our thoughts. So as I'm looking for the validation of my pre-existing opinion, I'm seeking the news that is validating what I think. And the algorithms of the social media are consistently feeding me with the same thing that I already believe in. So that's happening across the globe. For example, right now they were saying that the Ukraine conflict, one portion of the Ukraine conflict will take place within the boundaries of Ukraine. The other portion of the conflict is going to be all these cyber attacks that will be launched, where the misinformation will be absolutely pervasive. As Nick knows, and Dr. Dave, I wasn't sure if you heard my introduction. I'm from the former Yugoslavia. I'm from the Balkan region. I'm from Sarajevo, from Bosnia. And for example, the NATO troops right now are increasing their presence in the Balkans. So you are now, all you need to do, and I'm talking about that little microcosm that I'm familiar with. If you take a look at the news in the Balkans, every single one of the individual countries, they're perceiving that presence vastly differently. And there's so much misinformation as to why we're increasing the presence of military in the Balkans, in the Adriatic Sea. I mean, one can logically conclude it's because of what's happening in the Ukraine right now. But the truth of the matter is the military presence was there even prior to the Ukraine conflict. But if you watch the news and you go to the news in Serbia and Bosnia and Croatia and Montenegro, it doesn't matter. You're gonna read a vastly different interpretation of what's happening in the Balkans right now in reference to what's happening in Russia. So when you say, Nick, you asked this wonderful question, what can we do? I'm very much optimistic, and I told you I was expressing my optimism when it comes to the world of education. I am not that optimistic when it comes to what's happening in the world of social media nowadays, and how much of a damage that impacts the world affairs, the world of politics, the world of decision making. I am not sure that we should regulate it per se, but at the same point of time, the misinformation is impacting everyone, even at the highest level, and a lot of times decisions are made that are not well vetted due to the misinformation that is out there. So hopefully, Dr. Dave, you're going to have a little bit more of a positive outlook on this situation, because right now I see a lot of gray area that is quite concerning to me.
Well, first, I've had the pleasure of going to Sarajevo, although the time that I was there was not the best time to be there. I had to go in an armored vehicle and things of that nature, if you will, during the Balkans conflict. But I think that younger generations, as Dr. Maya mentioned, are pretty much getting all of their information online. I don't know that many young people that buy newspapers, okay, and they're really looking at it online. And frankly, even older generations like myself, I get a lot of information online. The key is that you need to understand who are trusted sources. And to the extent that you have any doubt about that, you need to have multiple sources. But frankly, it's not just an issue of what's online. It's an issue of what's on the airways. I mean, whether it's television, whether it's radio, we have a significant fragmentation. And more and more people are looking at news and information outlets that align with their own personal philosophy. And that's one of the reasons why I think there's such a ideological divide. I mean, I get more concerned about the ideological divide than I do the partisan divide in this country. And let's go back to Ukraine. I mean, look what's going on in Ukraine. You look at the availability of information and then the accuracy of information. And we know that a lot has been done to deny access to any information, especially in Russia. I mean, the state is taking steps to make sure that people don't have access to information. And then the information they do have access to is propaganda. All right. So I think this is a challenge, not just on social media, which I agree is a bigger challenge with Dr. Maya. I agree with that. It's a bigger challenge, especially with regard to the younger generations. But I think it's a challenge with regard to mainstream media. But at least with regard to mainstream media in democracies, you have the availability of information. When you're dealing with autocratic governments, you may not even have access to information, and whatever information you gain access to is obviously going to be slanted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but also, David, isn't there another war going on here besides the war in Ukraine? It's the war of public opinion. In
Sure.
other words, if you look at when I'm looking at this, I look at it from two ways. One, there's the war where they bring in their troops, and I think, but see, it's hard to get the right information. I think that the Russian army kind of got stalled in Ukraine. and I don't know why. In other words, they show this convoy heading to Ukraine, but never getting there, heading to Kyiv, never getting there. But isn't there also a war on public opinion? In other words, where I believe Putin is losing this war, his arguments, which I've listened to before, some of them are actually cogent arguments. In other words, he goes, well, I don't want NATO in my backyard. I want the Ukraine to be neutral. In other words, they seem to be reasonable requests. Some of the other requests, which I didn't know, that apparently there was some pipeline of water that was streaming down into Crimea that Ukraine just cut off because they could. And then there was some pipelines going through Ukraine that Ukraine charged a premium for. But it sounds to me that Vladimir Putin, how you say his press agents aren't very good. They remind me of Joe Biden's press agents. They're just not very good at delivering their message. In other words, so I'm looking at Putin's arguments and they're being quashed by all the Western press. So he's losing. I hate to say this, but he is really losing, other than in China, the battle of world public opinion. He's getting slaughtered. So,
well, I mean, as has been said, the pen is mightier than the sword, right? So the information war is part of what's going on, and then you've got a kinetic war going on. You know, if you're in Russia, you're not being told much about what's going on in Ukraine, and to the extent that you're being told anything, it's all slanted information. That's all propaganda, if you will, and that's been verified by the fact that a number of Russian, you know, pilots and soldiers that have been captured didn't even know why they were there. They thought it was a training exercise, and they thought they were there to try to help people, not hurt people, if you will. I think that Putin really miscalculated with regard to Ukraine. I mean, my personal view is that what he wanted to do was he wanted to take eastern Ukraine, which is more Russian, you create a bridge to Crimea, topple the government in Western Ukraine, put in a friendly government in Western Ukraine, which would provide the buffer to NATO. There's no way in the world I think he wants to take over all of Ukraine, because then there's no buffer to NATO, you know, if you do that. I think he miscalculated in many regards. One, he miscalculated, he underestimated the ability of the Ukrainian military, and he definitely underestimated the will of the Ukrainian people. He also, I think, overestimated the ability of his own military capabilities, if you will. And, and so what we're seeing is that when you have, when you have a country that's united and wants to defend its territory and is armed, then, you better take that seriously. Just imagine what that would be like if people tried to do the same thing in the United States. Not going to happen. Okay. Not going to happen. Okay. Because it would be 10 times worse if people tried to do that in the United States.
Absolutely. And actually, I read something today that really solidifies in my head exactly what you're saying. They were saying on one side, there's no argument that Russian force at this point of time, at least at this juncture of time, is better equipped, but they are lacking passion. And if you, going back to your point of soldiers being there not knowing why they're there, or soldiers being there not feeling passionate about what they're doing at this point of time, because they are also witnessing civilian casualties, they are also seeing the destruction, and we see what's happening in Russia with all the demonstrations and a lot of people that are really anti this war. So you have the lack of passion with a military power, and then you have a country in a completely desperate shape, fighting for its own existence. So a lot of times through history, we've seen this, and you've been in the Balkans, we've seen what happens when the military power encounters a nation that is desperate to survive. And at that point of time, there is, you start getting into the guerrilla wars type of situation. Today, I read that what they're doing with the Russian convoy, back to Nick's point, why is the Russian convoy moving as slow as it does? It's moving as slow as it does because it's constantly exposed to the small-scale attacks at different points of the convoy. And that is what's significantly slowing them down. Then another thing is, back to your point, is what was, none of us are in Putin's head. It doesn't appear to be a good place to be in to begin with. But what was his core goal versus what he's doing right now? Because there's no way that his goal would be to take over the entire the entire Ukraine, because that would make zero sense, not only military, but he would not be able to maintain it. With that said, sanctions are imposed against Russia, but keep in mind what Russia can do, especially to Eastern Europe, to retaliate when it comes to those sanctions. A lot of times they cannot hurt the Western Europe as much as they can hurt the Eastern Europe. All they need to do is close the gas pipelines. And what ends up happening is half of the Eastern Europe is prone to freezing to death. So there are certain things that Russia has in its hands that is a straightforward blackmailing the rest of the world, especially Eastern Europe in particular. And those are the things that Putin has in his deck of cards that he's mindful of.
Well, and the United States energy policy deserves an F in my view, okay, because we were energy independent as recently as about a year ago. Now we are an importing nation. We're importing from Russia, among other places. We're now trying to cut off Russia, possibly. But where are we going to get it from? We're going to get it from Venezuela and Iran. I mean, you know, people didn't realize not just the economic, but the national security implications of energy independence. Climate change is real. And we need to move towards alternative forms of energy. At the same point in time, we need to do that in a measured fashion. We have to be able to balance economic, national security, and environmental interest. And we also have to understand that, you know, when you're talking about climate change, it deals with the entire planet, that ultimately you have to deal with this on a global basis. If all you're doing is moving it from one country to another country, you're not really solving the problem. And if everybody's not part of the game or part of the effort, well, they need to be in order for you to be successful.
David, is there a strategy in Washington, D.C.? And I know you live outside the Beltway, so I never say that you're an insider on that. And the strategy is this, that but I don't know if they think up there. I have no idea. 30% of the gross domestic product from Russia is actually selling oil and gas to places like the United States and Western Europe. We haven't shut that off yet. Now, the reason I say yet, it's still winter time in the Balkans. It's winter time in Western Europe, et cetera. But once winter is gone and the demand from oil becomes more a luxury than a necessity, will the West move to shut it off? Because this is a big GDP number. Russia relies heavily on the export of oil and gas to the West. If we shut that off, that shuts off, you have to imagine all the Russians, and the ruble is down 90%. Okay. This is a 30% cut in their GDP if we shut them off, because China doesn't really pay them anything for their oil. Is the West waiting for this, if this thing continues, to go ahead and just shut Russia off? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think it's true that when you get into the spring and past winter and the very cold months, that that you've got more flexibility as to what do you do in this regard, and so I think that's true. And China obviously has an alliance with Russia from an economic, from a diplomatic, from a military, and other perspectives. I'm not sure about the economic arrangements between Russia and China with regard to energy. Most energy trades are going in dollars. All right, they're going in dollars, if you will. And China obviously is a major importing nation of energy, whereas Russia is a major exporting nation. So I don't know how much of a release valve that would be for them. Iran. I mean, one of the reasons that China has spent a lot of money in the Belt and Road Initiative in Iran, and has actually deployed some troops in Iran to protect their economic interests there, is because China does need a reliable source of energy in order to fuel its economy. And so, Iran is obviously one place that it's been relying on right now. So, yeah, you have more options as time goes on. My point is different. We should be energy independent. And if we were energy independent, then we would have the ability to provide a release valve for Europe so that they couldn't be held hostage by Putin. That's my point.
Yeah. And that actually really is a great segue into my point. okay, or the moment I hear stuff along the line is like, let's replace Russian dependency, let's all vote for it. But what's the backup plan? What's the alternative? Because in certain areas, around April, you get some relief when it comes to cold weather, but coming September, it is already time to turn on the central heating again. And at that point of time is has the world found the alternative for those countries that are so heavily dependent on Russia? So that is something to be mindful of, because replacing one dependency with another may not be always the best place to go. But if we reach the level of energy independence, if we can get to that level, if we can accelerate the production to that level, let's not replace it with a dependence when it comes to certain countries that you mentioned that we may not necessarily want to get ourselves aligned with or partnered up with. So those are the things to be those are the things to be solved, and those are the things that I would imagine that Putin is very mindful of. That it's a very short time period. We're talking 5-6 months. Can replacement be found? So those are the things that he does have in the back of his mind as far as when it comes to some of the cars that he has on his table. So.
Yeah, and there's another thing I think that he miscalculated, which seems to exist today, that it wasn't in my political science books years ago. It's called the will of the people. Okay, in other words, you didn't ever study this, but if you looked at what happened in Afghanistan, the will of the people to fight was zero. I mean, the Taliban walked in, they put down their arms, and off they went. Now, when you look at what we're seeing in Ukraine, the will of the people is high. In other words, they don't accept Russian overlords, I guess, and so it's hard to put that calculus in because it's a non-quantifiable calculus into that. So, David, do you think that Putin? Because remember, in Crimea, the will of the people we're Russian anyway. Go ahead and take us, okay? And then the thing is, in Afghanistan, U.S. left and the Taliban took over, and the will of the United States looked to be pretty weak. When he left Afghanistan, I think also leaving Afghanistan opened the road to Ukraine. Because
I think there's absolutely no question that the way that we exited Afghanistan emboldened Putin and Xi Jinping. There's no question about that. All right. And I think the other thing that we have to keep in mind is that while ultimately we want to be able to get a reasonable resolution of the situation in Ukraine as quickly as we can, one has to keep your eye on Taiwan. Because I put in my latest book that I thought that China would take Taiwan no later than 2025. I think it's accelerated as a result of what's happened recently, but we'll have to wait and see. You also have to look at the issue. Will of the people is always important. It's of critical importance, as both of you have mentioned. All right. But the other angle is asymmetric warfare. And by asymmetric, I don't mean cyber. I'm talking about the fact guerrilla warfare versus conventional warfare. We saw that in Afghanistan when the Russians were in Afghanistan. We saw that to the United States when the United States was in Vietnam. Believe it or not, at the end of the Civil War in the United States, Jefferson Davis ordered Robert E. Lee to go into the Appalachian Mountains and to conduct, basically asymmetric warfare, guerrilla warfare, if you will. And to Lee's credit, he said, no, I won't do that. It's over, if you will. And so, there are a lot of issues here, but there's no question that, and even asymmetric warfare has to deal with the will of the people, right? That has a lot to do with that. And we're seeing that very much manifested here in Ukraine.
And we cannot, I agree with everything you said. We also cannot underestimate the exhaust, people feeling exhausted. Think about of everything that Afghanistan went through in so many decades, and getting to the point where I don't know that necessarily there's no such a thing as the will of the people of Afghanistan, but they've been beaten up, to the point of how much of the how much of the infrastructure people that wanted to fight the Taliban ended up having. So those are the type of things, comparing one region to the other at some point of time. I'm so glad to see the energy of Ukraine people. I'm so glad to see their passion. I'm so glad to see their willingness to fight. But when you think about a nation that has been exposed to everything, Afghanistan has been exposed in so many decades, starting with the Russian invasion that you mentioned right now, even prior to that period. I don't know that necessarily maybe we're doing them justice if we're doing the comparison, whether they still have the will, because I see like women of Afghanistan, what they're trying to do at a very small scale, trying to still fight within Afghanistan. But they're, right now they don't have their organization. They're not well organized. So we shall see what happens in Afghanistan as well. So.
Yeah,
I have to give a plug to your book, America in 2040, Still a Superpower. And I do like that prediction of the, because the people in China are already on the websites talking about taking over Taiwan. They're looking at this very carefully. I believe if we lose Ukraine, they're going to take Taiwan because they're going to say the West is weak. We're just going to go ahead and surround, like you said, surround it and choke them out.
This is interesting, okay, because first, my wife and I like to do cruises. It's our number one favorite thing, right? We were booked on a cruise, a Black Sea cruise, in June to go to Odessa, to go to Sochi, or whatever. I made a decision. I made a decision in December that we probably wasn't a good time to go. Now that's before there was any invasion, but
good idea.
We're now looking at doing a cruise to the Far East. My wife has never been to Shanghai. I have, but she hasn't been. She wants to go to Shanghai. So we have one cruise that goes to Taiwan and Shanghai and Hong Kong. We have another one that's more Japan or whatever. So we're going to have to make a decision here. Yeah. My personal view is while the odds that there would be an invasion have increased as a result of Afghanistan, it could further increase as a result of what happens with Ukraine. I don't see anything happening until after Xi Jinping is, after the major party Congress, which is not until the fall, I think. And hopefully it won't happen, but I think the odds have increased. Afghanistan, we talked about history, right? We're not real good on history, okay? The only battle that Alexander the Great ever didn't win was in Afghanistan, okay? Yeah. The UK got kicked out of Afghanistan. The Russians or USSR, Soviets got kicked out of Afghanistan. The Americans got kicked out of Afghanistan. Part of the problem is you have to have an objective. In the case of the United States, our objective should have been to get rid of the government that was harboring the terrorists and to get rid of the terrorists. And once we did that, we should have had a minimal presence. We never should have given up Bagram. It's tremendously strategic important, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese don't take it over at some point. We never should have given that up, but we should have gotten out with most of our troops a lot earlier than we did. At the same point in time, the way that we exited has emboldened our adversaries.
Right. I certainly agree with you on that one. And we're running out of time, but we do want to thank our guest, Dr. Maya, who's with the University of Arizona Global Campus, and the Honorable David M. Walker, former Comptroller General of the United States. We'll see everybody next week on Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. Until then, take care. And hopefully we'll be around next week because Russia won't shut down our media program. We are shut down in Russia, by the way. But anyway, other than that place, we're doing good. We'll see you next week.
Thank you, Nick. David, it was great meeting you.
Thank you. Bye. Spasiba. Bye-bye.